In January of 2005, a few forward-thinking legislators in Washington state introduced a bill to allow police officers to collect DNA upon felony arrest. Unfortunately, the state legislature failed to pass this law. As a direct result, Anthony Caspar Diaz was free to rape and sexually assault 8 women, including a 13-year-old girl. Hi, I'm John Walsh, host of America's Most Wanted, and I'm here to let you know about one of the most powerful tools available to crime fighters today: DNA testing of arrestees. Along with fingerprinting upon arrest, collecting a simple cheek swab can help prevent and solve hundreds of thousands of crimes. By passing this legislation, the men and women of law enforcement can finally use the power of DNA to its full potential.
Databases of known criminals have helped solve thousands of cases that would otherwise go unsolved. But unfortunately, it's not enough. We must pass legislation that allows law enforcement to collect DNA from felony arrestees, and not just convicted felons. By doing so, your state can prevent more crimes, save more lives, and help to exonerate the innocent.
The states that have passed these laws have seen a spike in solved crimes through cold hits. Having an arrestee provision would mean that the offender sample would be in the database and matched up against unsolved crimes at the earliest opportunity. When you think about the lives that'll be saved by passing a law, and realize that if you resist it, it'll be clear how many lives were lost or jeopardized or compromised by your inactions.
New Mexico recently committed to further protect its people by passing Katie's Law for arrestee DNA testing. The citizens of this state can now feel safer, and that's thanks in a big part to the courage and determination of Jan Sepich.
Katie was our firstborn, and Katie was a fierce protector of all that she loved. I think she saw her role as always being the one that took care of everyone in her life that needed her. I always said that if Katie loved you, she loved you like a freight train. She loved her family and her friends with a fierceness that was just unbelievable. Katie graduated in May of 2003 from New Mexico State University with a degree in marketing and business. And then she started working on her MBA, and she was looking forward to making a difference in the world. Katie worked all day at the restaurant where she was a server. After that, she went out with some friends, and then she ended up at some friend's house. And apparently she and her boyfriend had an argument. She got very angry and decided to walk home. She walked about 6 blocks home and never made it into her house. We were called the next day saying she was missing. No one had seen her since she left the party. And then later that day, we found out that she had been found by target shooters in an old city dump. She had been brutally raped, murdered, and her body set on fire. Katie really fought hard for her life, and there was skin and blood under her fingernails that had the DNA of her attacker. And that DNA was sent to CODIS, which is the database for DNA. And the detective told me that they would be running that DNA against the offender DNA frequently to look for a match. And I was very hopeful when I heard that, because I said, this guy was such a horrible man, he'll be arrested for something else, and we'll have him. And that's when I learned that in New Mexico, as in most other states, it's illegal to take DNA upon arrest.
It takes only a few seconds to collect a DNA sample. This minimally invasive technique involves lightly swabbing the inside of an arrestee's cheek. The profile is then entered into a database and compared against forensic evidence from crime scenes across the country.
Fingerprinting has been traditionally a great tool. Part of the challenge, however, with fingerprints is that we often don't get a full fingerprint or a set of fingerprints, and they're only present on certain objects. In contrast, DNA testing can make use of the fact that we have DNA in all of our cells, whether it's a hair cell, a blood cell, a skin cell, any body fluid or tissue will have DNA. The markers that we use are used only for human identification. By knowing my or your complete profile at these 15 markers, we can't tell anything about your height, your weight, your race, your ethnicity, or anything about your health or predisposition to disease. When we type a DNA sample between 13 and 15 of these markers, called STRs, the chance for a spurious match between unrelated individuals is virtually zero.
3 months after Katie was murdered, Gabriel Avila was arrested for aggravated burglary. We didn't have a law allowing DNA to be taken upon felony arrest in New Mexico at that time, so they couldn't take his DNA. We had to wait until he had been convicted and incarcerated before they took his DNA, and it was matched to the crime scene DNA that was found on Katie. If we had had DNA upon felony arrest when Gabriel Avila was arrested 3 months after he murdered Katie, we would have saved over $200,000, because that's how much was spent investigating her murder between the time he was arrested 3 months after he killed her and the time they had the match 3 years and 3 months later. The true cost of not passing these laws is lives, because there are people who will be murdered because these laws are not passed. There are people who will be raped and traumatized because we don't pass these laws.
Mugshots, fingerprints, social security numbers. States already use a number of methods to identify arrestees. By adding DNA to this list, crime fighters have a better chance to solve more crimes faster.
DNA is uniquely different than all other types of evidence. It can exonerate the innocent and make sure that we don't arrest or convict the wrong individual. But it can also convict those individuals who are guilty of the offense that they've been arrested for. DNA testing is blind the race, simple as that. And when it comes down to racial profiling, it's going to match up those individuals, whether they be black, white, Hispanic, whatever, to that DNA at the crime scene. Taking DNA at the initial stage of arrest puts the investigator, sends the investigators in the right direction. It's going to save a tremendous amount of manpower and man hours.
In 2005, the city of Chicago took a closer look at the criminal history of 8 convicted felons. The results were shocking. 60 violent crimes, including 53 rapes and murders, could have been prevented with DNA arrestee testing. Andre Crawford's criminal career is case in point. Crawford killed 11 and raped 1 before finally being brought to justice. During his 7-year killing spree, he was arrested 4 times but never convicted. Without his DNA, investigators had no way to link Crawford to these unsolved crimes.
I don't know how we, as members of the community who are concerned with public safety, can look victims and their families in the face, knowing that we can do things in the lab to help bring perpetrators of serious crimes to justice. To me, it's unconscionable not to use these methods to solve serious crimes and to prevent future crimes.
There's no telling how many victims are innocent victims, innocent kids, that's going to be brutalized, murdered with these offenders.
I've sat in rooms with family members on cases we solved 20 or 30 years later. And if you've ever undergone that experience, you realize that we have to do this. We have to do this to make their lives whole, and we have to do this to make sure those crimes never get repeated in the future.
We are going to know the names of those who will die because this law's not passed. We'll know who they are. And that's a tremendous burden. We have to pass these laws to save those lives.
The federal government and a growing number of forward-thinking states have already taken a stand. Now it's your turn.
Together, we can make DNA testing of arrestees a reality. Reach out to law enforcement and victims advocates groups in your state today, because when dangerous criminals go free, it's our freedom that's at risk.
States must act now to close this loophole in the law. Without it, hardened criminals are allowed to get away with terrible crimes.
The longer this legislation remains in limbo, the longer the list of victims will become. Knowing that people didn't have to die is a heavy burden to bear. But if we pass these laws, we can help save lives.
Don't wait to protect the citizens of your state. Bring American crime fighting into the 21st century. Please, pass arrestee DNA testing laws now.